It started as a simple camping trip, something I'd done dozens of times before. Just me, my gear, and the woods. I always liked the isolation. Cleared my head. The idea this time was to go a bit deeper into the forest than I normally would, away from the usual trails and marked sites, to a place not listed on park brochures. I had studied a few topographic maps, cross-referenced old hiking blogs, and picked a patch of forest that seemed tucked away, about a 6-hour hike from the nearest parking lot. I arrived on a Friday morning, early enough that the parking area was still mostly empty. A couple of cars sat off to the side, but the trail entrance was quiet. The air was crisp for mid-September, perfect for hiking. I had my pack on, double-checked my supplies, locked up the car, and started walking. The trail was clear for the first few miles, well-marked, well-used. As expected, the further I went, the less maintained it became. After about 2 hours, I stepped off the established path and followed an old fire road that hadn't seen any real use in years. It was overgrown in places, but still navigable. From there, I cut into the woods proper using compass bearings and landmarks I had memorized. It took another few hours of hiking through brush and dodging deadfall before I reached the clearing I had picked out on the map. It was near a narrow creek, surrounded by thick pine, with a small rise to the east that offered some protection from wind. It was perfect, quiet, flat, and secluded. I set up camp in the middle of the clearing. My tent went up easily, and I cleared a small ring for a fire. I always keep my setup tight and organized. Food in a bear bag, gear stowed just right, waste buried properly. I take that stuff seriously. Once camp was squared away, I sat by the creek and filtered water for the night. I boiled some instant rice and tuna, ate in silence, and listened to the forest. Birds called overhead, squirrels rustled in the brush. The creek babbled on without pause. I didn't see another person all day. That night, I built a small fire. The sky was clear. The stars were sharp and cold above the trees. I leaned back on my backpack and let myself relax. My thoughts drifted in and out, but one strange thing nagged at me. A phrase I had read the night before while reading an article on a true crime forum. It wasn't even part of the headline, just something buried in the comments section. Someone had written, "Oh, now that's an excellent question," in response to a thread about unsolved disappearances in national forests. The comment stuck with me for some reason. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way it was written, like whoever wrote it knew something others didn't. The context was vague, but it had felt personal. I brushed it off. I put out the fire, climbed into my sleeping bag, and zipped up the tent. I drifted to sleep, listening to the usual forest sounds. I woke up at some point in the night. I don't know what time it was because I hadn't brought a watch, and I didn't want to turn on my headlamp and destroy my night vision. But I remember what woke me. Silence. Complete silence. No bugs, no birds, not even the creek. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. I stayed still. My eyes adjusted slowly. I could just barely see the outline of my tent interior. I held my breath, listening. I didn't hear anything at first. Then, a soft thud, like someone stepping on moss-covered ground just outside the tent. I froze. Another thud. This one closer. Then another. Then nothing. I waited. My body was tense, every part of me alert. I thought about my bear spray, my knife, the axe by the fire pit, all outside the tent. I lay there for what felt like hours, barely breathing. Eventually, the night sounds returned. The chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the trees, the trickle of the creek. Whatever had been there was gone, or at least it had stopped moving. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed in the tent, ears wide open, until the sky began to lighten. When the sun was up, I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out. The clearing looked normal, nothing out of place. I walked the perimeter slowly. I didn't find tracks, but the forest floor was soft and covered with pine needles. Anything could have passed through and left little trace. I checked the food bag untouched. Nothing disturbed. Still, something felt off. Not just nerves. The air had that feeling like before a storm, thick and tense, even though the sky was clear. I couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, had stood just outside my tent while I slept. I tried to distract myself. I ate breakfast, refilled my water, and set off for a short hike to a ridge I had seen on the map. I thought maybe some movement and daylight would clear my head. The hike was uneventful at first. I moved slow, taking note of landmarks, checking my bearings. But about halfway up the slope, I found something odd. A tree, about 20 feet tall, had deep grooves in its bark about shoulder high. Not claw marks. These were straight cuts, like from a knife. But they weren't random. They formed an odd pattern, almost like tallies or slashes, carved over and over in uneven rows. Some old, some new. I touched one. The bark was fresh beneath, cut not long ago. It gave me a bad feeling, and I backed away without looking too long at it. I didn't make it to the ridge. I turned back, moving quicker than before, not quite running but not taking breaks either. My senses were on fire. When I got back to camp, something else was wrong. The fire pit had been moved. Not just kicked or scattered, but moved. The stones I had arranged were now in a new shape, a circle within a circle. I had never made it like that. My gear was still there. Nothing stolen, nothing torn or broken. Just the fire pit rearranged. That was it for me. I packed up everything as fast as I could. I didn't care if I had to hike out in the dark. I wanted to be gone. Took hours to retrace my steps. The sun dipped low, and the trees turned gold, then black. I kept moving, but somewhere along the old fire road, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My own boot prints were beside me, but so were others. Fainter, smaller prints, bare feet. Not fresh, like they had been walking parallel to me before, maybe on the hike in. I started to move faster. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't eat. I pushed until I was back on the main trail, and even then I didn't slow down. I finally reached my car after dark, completely spent, heart still racing. When I got in and locked the doors, I sat in silence for a few minutes, breathing hard. I turned the engine over and watched the headlights light up the narrow gravel road. Just before I shifted into drive, I saw it. In the tree line, just barely illuminated by the high beams, movement. Person, standing still, far enough that I couldn't make out a face. But they weren't moving, just watching. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I was in range of cell service. I pulled over and sent a location pin to my brother, just in case, then kept driving until I was back home. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the fire pit, the strange carvings, the footsteps, and then that one phrase again, floating through my brain. Oh, now that's an excellent question. It didn't make sense until a week later. I was going through my browser history, trying to find that old article thread, trying to see if maybe I had imagined it. I found it. The post was about cold cases, people who had gone missing in forested areas, some for years, some never found. And there was that comment again. But when I clicked on the profile of the person who had posted it, the account had been deleted. No posts, no bio, nothing else tied to it. Except one thing, a location tag from one of the older posts. It was the same county I had just camped in. That wasn't just a random comment. It wasn't just some troll on the internet. It felt like a breadcrumb, a warning, or worse, bait. I still don't know who was out there with me. I never saw a face, never heard a voice. But something or someone had followed me, had stood outside my tent, had rearranged my camp like a message. And they had been there long before I ever stepped into that clearing. I haven't been camping since. I sold most of my gear, the tent's in the trash. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I'll scroll through those same online threads and I'll see new comments, new accounts, no profile pictures, short messages, things like, "Nice spot you picked. Ever go back?" Or worst of all, "Let us know when you go again." I don't reply. I don't go again. I never thought camping could be scary until that weekend. I used to think of the woods as calm, quiet, the kind of place where you go to escape the noise of life. And that's exactly what I wanted. I had been feeling worn down after weeks of stress at work, barely sleeping, eating like crap, getting home and just collapsing in bed every night. I needed to get away from the screens, the phone calls, the city sounds, the constant emails. I just wanted to hear wind through trees, birds, Maybe some water nearby if I was lucky. I didn't want company. I didn't want plans. I just wanted to pitch a tent somewhere far away and forget about people for a while. I picked a campsite deep in a national forest, one I'd never been to before. It wasn't an official campground. I found it online from someone who mentioned a clearing about 5 miles in from a trailhead that didn't see much use. It was far from any ranger stations or popular campsites, and the post said the clearing had a small stream nearby. That was all I needed. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, food, headlamp, a couple knives, first aid kit, bear spray. Just enough to keep me safe and alive. I left my car at the trailhead on a Friday morning and started hiking. The trail was overgrown in some parts and completely missing in others. I had to rely more on landmarks than any visible path. I followed a ridgeline for about an hour, then dipped into a gully and climbed back up the far side, moving around thick brush and fallen trees. It was quiet out there, too quiet at times. I passed a few sets of deer tracks, maybe a bobcat. Once I heard something crash in the distance, maybe a tree branch falling, but there was no one else out there. No voices, no music, no airplane noise. It was perfect. After a few hours, I found the clearing. It was just like the post had said. Flat, with soft moss and short grass, open to the sky but surrounded by trees on every side. The stream was real, too, maybe 30 feet away, shallow and clear, with a soft trickle that filled the space with sound. I set up camp near the tree line, where I could still see the sky but also have some cover if it rained. That first night was uneventful. I made a fire, boiled some water, cooked one of those foil pouch meals that always taste way better outdoors than they do at home. I sat by the fire until it burned low, then crawled into my tent and passed out. I must have slept 10 hours straight. The next morning, I hiked around a bit. I didn't go far, just far enough to stretch my legs and get a better sense of the area. I found a few animal dens in the brush and a small hill with a rock outcrop that gave me a clear view in every direction. It was all untouched, wild. I didn't even see old fire rings or litter. I started to feel proud of myself for finding a place so isolated. I felt small out there, but in a good way. That evening, I got a little more uneasy. I don't know why. It wasn't anything obvious. The woods felt the same, silent, still, but something in my gut started to twist. Maybe it was the way the shadows were falling. The trees to the west were thick and tall, and once the sun dropped low, they made everything darker than it should have been. I got a feeling I couldn't shake. Not like I was being watched exactly, just that I shouldn't be there. I tried to ignore it. I made another fire. I cooked another meal. I cleaned up, but I kept glancing behind me into the trees, listening. I told myself it was just my nerves acting up. Being alone out here was bound to do that eventually. I didn't have cell service, but I had a signal tracker that pinged my GPS coordinates to a satellite in case of emergency. That was my safety net. If something happened, I could call for help. That made me feel a bit better. The weirdness started that night. I had just gone into my tent and zipped up the flap. I had my headlamp on and was reading the small paper map I'd brought, trying to trace my hike from the trailhead to where I was now. I didn't have music playing, didn't have earplugs in. I like to hear what's going on around me when I sleep in the woods. As I was lying there, I heard something faint, a sound that didn't match the stream or the wind. It was quick, like a footstep, just one. It came from the edge of the clearing, over where the trees began. I froze. I listened hard. Nothing else. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but deer don't take one step and then stop. I clicked off my headlamp and waited in the dark. I lay there for probably 20 minutes, not moving. No more footsteps. No breathing. Nothing breaking twigs or rustling in the brush. I stayed awake for hours. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The second full day felt more tense. I didn't want to go far from the campsite. I kept looking around, trying to see if there were tracks in the dirt near the tree line, but it was too hard to tell. The ground was covered in needles and dead leaves. I couldn't find anything out of place, but I didn't feel at ease anymore. I stayed busy, collected water, reinforced the tent stakes, made more firewood, but I didn't go hiking again. That night, I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just ate a cold meal and got into my tent early, still fully dressed, boots on, just in case. I left the headlamp on low and sat with my back against my pack. I listened. For a long time, nothing. Just the water, the trees creaking, a few bugs. Then, out of nowhere, I heard what sounded like a zipper. My body went cold. Not the zipper on my tent. It came from somewhere outside. I froze. It sounded again. A short, metallic zzzzzt. It was quiet, but too clear. Like someone was trying to be careful with it. Then silence again. I sat there for what felt like hours. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Eventually, I lay down but didn't close my eyes. My hand stayed on the can of bear spray next to me. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I checked the area around my tent. Nothing looked disturbed. The stream was still flowing. No footprints. No wrappers or objects out of place. But something wasn't right. I decided I'd pack up and hike out that evening instead of waiting another night. I'd already had 2 full days. I felt like I got what I came for, even if something about it had gone sideways. I spent the day slowly tearing down the camp. I rolled up my sleeping bag, put away food, collapsed the tent but left it folded on the ground for last. I kept scanning the trees. I started hearing little sounds in the forest. Twigs snapping, rustles, occasional thumps, but I couldn't see anything. It was like something or someone was circling me at a distance just out of view. Around 3 p.m., I went to the stream to fill my bottle one last time. I crouched down, water rushing over my hands, and suddenly something made me look over my shoulder. I saw something move just inside the tree line. Quick, human height, gray or green clothing, then gone. I stood up fast, heart slamming in my chest. I stared into the trees but saw nothing. No birds took flight, no squirrel ran. But I knew what I saw. I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't run, but I didn't take my time either. I walked back to camp, shoved everything into my pack, and got out of there. I didn't bother folding the tent. I stuffed it in. I left gear behind. I just wanted to be gone before sunset. The trail back felt longer than before. Every few minutes I stopped and looked behind me. I never saw anything clearly again, but I heard things. Something following, something matching my pace. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. No voices, no animals, just this overwhelming sense of being stalked. The last half mile to the trailhead was the worst. The woods were dense there, no light getting through. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound felt wrong. I was almost jogging by the time I reached the road. My car was still there. I jumped in, locked the doors, and didn't stop until I hit the highway. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel 2 hours away. Couldn't sleep. I sat in bed thinking, trying to make sense of what happened. It had to be a person, not a ghost, not an animal. A person who had been watching me, maybe more than one. Maybe they'd been following since day one. Maybe they lived out there. Here's the part that still bothers me. When I got home, I unpacked everything slowly. I laid my gear out in the living room. When I opened my tent to clean it, I found something inside. Just a small, smooth stone, round and gray, placed right in the center of the tent floor. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't something I'd brought in. It wasn't something I'd missed. It had been placed there, after I'd packed everything. While I was still there, whoever was watching me, they got close enough to open my tent while I was still at that stream. Maybe I was only gone 10 minutes, but that was enough. I haven't been camping alone since. It was the last weekend of August, and I had taken a few days off from work to clear my head. Things had been weighing on me lately. Deadlines, meetings, and just life piling up. I needed to disconnect. I decided to head up north to a remote campground I'd been to once before, years ago. It was deep in the woods near a small town that had maybe one diner and a gas station. The kind of place where no one asked questions, and nobody cared if you were alone. The campground wasn't marked on most maps. A friend had told me about it during college. You had to drive past the official campsites, go about 5 miles down a gravel service road, then take a narrow trail that looked more like a deer path. At the end, there was a wide clearing by a small lake, completely isolated. No cell service, no electricity. Just the trees, the water, and if you were lucky, no one else for miles. I got there late in the afternoon on a Thursday. The drive had taken longer than expected. The last part of the road had been washed out in spots, and I had to inch through deep ruts, hoping my old SUV wouldn't bottom out. When I finally pulled into the clearing, the sun was low, filtering orange through the tree line. I parked, stretched my legs, and got to setting up camp. I had brought a 2-person tent, a camp stove, enough food for 3 nights, a folding chair, and a small cooler. I pitched the tent close to the lake where the ground was flattest and started a small fire to boil water for coffee. The evening was quiet. A couple of birds, the buzz of insects, nothing else. That kind of silence is both calming and eerie when you've been around noise your whole life. I ate some soup from a can and watched the sun dip behind the trees. As darkness fell, I sat by the fire and let my mind unwind. The woods are a strange place at night. Even when you know you're alone, every crack of a branch or rustle in the brush makes you sit up and look. I didn't hear much that night, though. Just the occasional splash from the lake, fish jumping, probably. I turned in early. My tent was just big enough for me to stretch out, and I lay there with my headlamp off, listening. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I remember waking up sometime around 2 a.m. to the sound of something moving outside. It wasn't loud, more like soft footsteps in the pine needles. I stayed still, listening. Could have been a deer, could have been a raccoon. I didn't move. Eventually, the sound faded, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. No signs of anything around the tent. I made some eggs on the stove, drank instant coffee, and spent the day walking around the woods. There were trails crisscrossing the area that looked like they hadn't been used in years. I didn't see another soul. I liked that. It felt like I was the only person in that whole stretch of forest. Later that afternoon, I took my camp chair to the edge of the lake and sat with my feet in the water. The sun was warm, the breeze cool. I must have sat there for hours, thinking about nothing. I didn't check my phone once. As evening came again, I made dinner, another canned meal, and restarted the fire. I kept glancing into the trees. I don't know why. It wasn't like anything was wrong, but I felt more alert than usual, like my body knew something before my brain did. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was just adjusting to the quiet. I went to bed around 10, and again, sometime after midnight, I heard movement. This time, it wasn't just steps. It sounded like breathing. I froze. It was right outside the tent. Heavy, deliberate breaths, not fast or panicked. It stayed there for maybe a minute. Then it was gone. I sat up and unzipped the tent flap just a little. The fire had died down, and the woods were dark. I didn't see anything. I stayed up for a while, listening. Nothing else came. In the morning, I checked the ground. There were faint footprints around the tent. Bare feet, no shoes. That stopped me. I stood there staring at them for a long time. They weren't animal tracks. The toes were too defined. They circled the tent, paused by the entrance, and then led off toward the woods. I didn't know what to think. I hadn't seen another person since I got there. It was private land, far from the main road. Who the hell would be walking around barefoot out here? And why would they come right up to my tent? I felt uneasy all day. I packed my gear back into the SUV just in case. I didn't want to leave yet. I still had one more night, but something about the footprints wouldn't leave my mind. I decided I'd leave early in the morning. Just one more night, and I'd head home at first light. That afternoon, I tried to enjoy myself. Went for another walk, sat by the lake, tried to relax, but I kept checking over my shoulder. Every now and then, I swore I saw movement between the trees, just a shadow slipping out of view, probably just my nerves. When the sun started to set, I made my fire big. I sat closer to it than usual, feeling the heat on my face. I kept my flashlight in my lap, a knife from my gear bag tucked under my thigh. I didn't like the way the forest felt that night. It was too still. It was just past midnight when I heard it again. The breathing. But this time, it didn't stay outside the tent. It unzipped it. I had fallen asleep but wasn't in a deep sleep. The sound of the zipper dragging down woke me up instantly. I sat bolt upright, My hand was already on the knife. I lunged toward the flap and shoved it open, light in one hand, blade in the other. There was no one, just the flap swaying open, the cold air pouring in. I shined my light around trees, bushes, nothing. I got out and scanned the clearing. Still no one, but the zipper hadn't undone itself. Someone had been there. I could feel it like a weight in the air. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed everything important into it, and threw it into the SUV. I left the tent behind. I didn't care anymore. I didn't sleep. I locked the SUV, leaned the seat back, and stared at the treetops through the windshield until the sky started to turn gray. When it was light enough to see, I drove out. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. That should have been the end of it. But a few weeks later, I was scrolling through some local news online when a headline caught my eye. Man wanted in series of isolated forest attacks finally caught. I clicked it. There was a picture of the guy. Greasy hair, hollow cheeks, eyes that looked empty. I didn't recognize him, but what stuck with me was the part of the article that said he had been living off-grid for years. He'd attacked campers in remote areas, always alone campers, always in places with little access, little surveillance. The article said he had committed his first known crime nearly 10 years earlier. A hiker had gone missing. Her camp had been found torn apart, blood on the ground. No body ever recovered. They didn't know how many victims there were in total. I looked back at the picture. What scared me wasn't that I had almost been one of them. What scared me was that I never saw him. Not once. Just the breathing, the footprints, the zipper. He had gotten close enough to unzip my tent while I was sleeping, and I hadn't heard him until it was almost too late. I don't go camping alone anymore. I don't even go near the woods. It was in late September when we went out. 6 of us. Just old friends, late 20s, trying to squeeze in one last camping trip before the cold really set in. We picked a place up north near an old logging road, somewhere we hadn't been before. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing we found on satellite maps that seemed flat enough and close to water. We wanted it isolated. That was the whole point. We all brought our own tents and food and gear. No cell signal, no one else around. The plan was 3 nights. Fishing, hiking, campfires, and forgetting about the world for a while. We parked our cars at the end of the road, hiked in with our packs, and set up camp by early evening. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, just cool enough to wear a hoodie at night but still warm in the sun. The trees were starting to turn, reds and yellows scattered in the canopy. We pitched our tents in a wide semicircle with the fire pit in the middle. Everyone was in a good mood. We cooked some sausages, passed around a bottle of whiskey, and someone even brought a Bluetooth speaker with a little charge left. We sat around telling old stories, laughing at nothing, just happy to be disconnected for a while. That night, I was the last one up. I usually am. I like the quiet after everyone goes to sleep, the way the fire crackles, the way the woods seem to lean in a little closer. I tossed some more logs on the fire and leaned back in my camp chair. My eyes were heavy, but I wasn't quite ready to crawl into the tent yet. Maybe it was the whiskey, or maybe it was the way the stars looked above the trees, but I felt peaceful. I don't remember hearing anything at first. No rustling, no footsteps. Just suddenly, someone was there. He was standing just outside the firelight. Not so far away that I couldn't see him, but just far enough that his face stayed in shadow. He was wearing dark clothes, a jacket maybe, and what looked like cargo pants. Older guy, probably late 40s, lean, short hair, or maybe shaved. He had a pack slung over one shoulder. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me, watching the fire. I froze for a second. My brain didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe I was drunk or seeing things, but I blinked a few times and he was still there, not moving, not threatening, but not exactly casual either. I gave a small wave, not saying anything, just an instinct. He didn't wave back, but after a few long seconds, he nodded. Then he turned, stepped around the fire pit slowly, and walked off into the woods. Not toward the trail, not toward any kind of path, just into the trees. I stayed there for another 5 or 10 minutes, unsure of what I'd just seen. Eventually, I tossed a few scoops of dirt on the fire, stirred the coals, and went to bed. The next morning, I didn't mention anything. I figured maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it was a hunter or another camper passing through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about it was off. The way he'd appeared and disappeared so quietly. The way he didn't seem startled or curious, just calm. Watching. That day went on like normal. We hiked down to the river, tried to catch fish and failed, then lounged in the sun for hours. We cooked more food, told more stories. Someone took mushrooms. I stayed sober. I wanted to keep my head clear. That night, I stayed up again. Not out of habit this time. I was watching. I had a flashlight and a small knife in my pocket, and I kept looking out past the circle of the firelight, waiting to see if he would come back. He didn't. But the next morning, things were weird. Not scary. Not wrong in an obvious way. Just off. One of my friends, John, swore his tent was zipped a little differently than how he left it. Another guy's socks were laid out neatly beside his boots, even though he never did that. My camp chair was cleaned off. I always leave it a mess. Ash from the fire, crumbs from snacks. But that morning it looked like someone had wiped it down. No one said anything right away, but you could tell everyone felt it. That uneasy tension, like the air was too still. I mentioned carefully that I thought someone had been around the night before. I described the man, how he'd stood just at the edge of the light and left without saying a word. That sparked a long, quiet conversation. Turns out I wasn't the only one who saw him. One of the other guys, Kyle, had seen someone by the trees when he got up in the middle of the night to pee. He said the man didn't do anything, just stood watching from the woods. He didn't wake anyone up because he thought it was a trick of the shadows. We started to think maybe someone was camping nearby. But the strange thing was, we'd been there for 2 full days and hadn't seen or heard any sign of another group. No voices, no smoke, no movement during the day, and we'd hiked around the area pretty thoroughly. We didn't pack up that day, but we stayed alert. No one went off alone. No one wandered far. That night, we agreed we'd all stay up around the fire for a while, just in case. But the guy never showed up again. Nothing happened. We stayed up until nearly 2 a.m., then went to bed. And then came the last morning. We woke up early, ready to break down camp. Everyone was quiet. There was a strange weight over the group, like we all knew something had been circling us and we weren't sure it was really gone. That's when we noticed the changes. First, our gear had been adjusted. Not stolen, nothing missing, just cleaned, tightened. My backpack was repacked better than I'd packed it myself. Someone's hatchet was freshly sharpened. Our firewood pile had been res-tacked. The trash bags were neatly tied, not how we'd left them. The worst part? Someone had boiled water. There was a small tin pot next to the fire pit. Clean, still warm. No one in our group had done it. That was when we really understood. Someone had been in our camp multiple times while we slept. Not to harm, not to steal, just to be there. We packed quickly. Everyone was dead silent as we loaded our bags, took down the tents, and erased our tracks. We were on the trail back to the cars by mid-morning. As we walked, I kept thinking about it. The man, the way he stood so still, the precision of the gear being moved. It wasn't random, felt like routine, like someone who'd been trained for it. Maybe he was ex-military. Maybe he'd been living in the woods for a long time. Maybe he'd come across us and planned something else, maybe worse, but changed his mind. That was the part that stuck with me most. The idea that someone had been close, that he'd studied us, watched us, entered our space, and then, for reasons we'll never know, decided not to act. Maybe we reminded him of his own kids. Maybe he used to camp with people like us before things in his life went wrong. Maybe he sat by our fire after we'd all gone to bed and listened to our laughter echoing in the woods. Maybe that made something shift in him. Or maybe he looked at us and thought, meh, not worth the bother. They seem like decent kids. I'll just let them be. We got back to the cars and took one last look around. Nothing seemed out of place. No footprints, no sign anyone had followed us. Just silence. We drove home. No one said much during the ride. Everyone seemed wrapped up in their own thoughts. I still think about it. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. That trip taught me something. That danger doesn't always come loud and obvious. Sometimes it comes quiet, calm, polite even. It watches from the edge of the firelight, waits, and then walks away. Not because it can't strike, but because, for reasons you'll never know, it decides not to. And you'll never really be sure if you were lucky, or if you were just spared. I didn't go looking for anything strange. It just happened one of those weeks where I was home more than usual. Work had slowed down, and the days were cold, gray, kind of quiet. My wife was busy with her online classes in the house most of the time, so I spent my mornings out in the garden. Even though it was early spring and still cold out, I liked being out there, pulling weeds, turning soil, just something slow and methodical to take my mind off things. Life had been dragging lately. Too much noise online, too many bills piling up, too many emails I didn't want to answer. It was Tuesday. I remember because the garbage bins were out, and I was in the backyard wearing an old hoodie and kneeling beside the raised bed we used for tomatoes. My hands were cold and muddy, but I wasn't in a rush. I looked up when I heard the back gate creak. It was my neighbor, Doug. I was surprised to see him. We weren't close, but we were friendly. Talked maybe once a month. He was a quiet guy, late 50s, worked at the university in town. Always wore polo shirts and had a careful, gentle way of speaking. I hadn't seen him in a while, but this time he didn't look like himself. He was in loose pajamas, which was odd on its own. It was 40 degrees out, maybe colder with the wind. His sleeves flapped at the wrists. His pants dragged in the dirt. He looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. Face narrow, cheeks hollowed out. The skin around his eyes dark and thin like paper. He wasn't holding anything, just standing there, arms limp at his sides. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. I remember trying to break the weird tension with a joke. If it weren't for the weather, it'd be a perfect beach day, huh? I gave a small smile, expecting a chuckle or something. But Doug just stood there, staring past me a little, like he wasn't sure where he was. His expression didn't change. I felt the weirdness of the silence, like I had said something awkward at a funeral. I looked down at the dirt and said something like, "All right, well, good to see you, man," and crouched back down. I figured maybe he wasn't feeling well or had just gotten some bad news. I didn't hear him leave. After a couple of minutes, I glanced up again, and he was gone. No footsteps, no gate creaking again. He just wasn't there anymore. I shook it off. The week moved along quietly. I didn't think about Doug again until Saturday. I had to drop off some old books at the post office for donation, and while I was in line, I noticed someone a few people ahead of me. It was Doug's wife, Lisa. I hadn't seen her since the holidays. She looked thinner too, but in a more expected way. Like she was grieving, maybe. She was mailing several packages, maybe a dozen. Small boxes, the kind you'd use to ship collectibles or delicate items. When I caught up to her outside the building, I asked, "Hey, how's Doug doing?" He looked kind of under the weather earlier this week when he stopped by the yard. She gave me this look, kind of blank, kind of sad. She looked like she was about to say something but wasn't sure if she heard me right. Then she said, "Doug passed away last month. Cancer." I just stood there like a fool. "Wait, what?" She nodded gently, her lips pressed into a line. "Yeah, he'd been fighting it for a year. He didn't tell many people. It got real bad at the end. Hospice came to the house. He passed in his sleep." My stomach sank. I felt dizzy. I must have been wrong," I muttered. "I thought I saw him in the yard. I guess I had the weekend wrong." Lisa gave me a strange smile, soft, polite, like she felt sorry for me. "It happens. Your mind fills in gaps." She glanced at the time, said something about needing to get back home, and walked off toward her car. I sat in my truck for a long time before I started the engine. My hands were shaking a little. I kept thinking, no, I saw him. I wasn't confused. I remembered the joke falling flat. I remembered how he looked. Thin, cold, silent. By the time I got home, the sun was going down. The sky was orange behind the bare trees, and the temperature had dropped fast. I walked into the kitchen, and my wife was making tea. Before I could even bring it up, she looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, I saw you out there talking with Doug last weekend." I froze. "What?" She kept stirring her tea. "You were in the garden, and I looked out the window and saw you talking to him by the fence." "Why?" I told her what Lisa had said. Her face changed. "No, that doesn't make sense. I saw you with him. He was standing by the gate. You were talking. Then he turned and walked off." I felt cold all over again. She followed me to the living room, and I pulled up the security camera feed on my laptop. We have a camera over the back porch that points toward the yard. It's not super high-tech, but it records motion clips. We scrolled back to the footage from the day I remembered seeing him. We watched it together. There I was, kneeling, then standing. I looked up. My mouth moved. I stepped back a little and gestured. Then I knelt down again and kept working. But I was alone. No one was standing across from me. No one entered or left the frame. Not even a shadow. Just me talking to no one. My wife didn't say anything at first. She just leaned in, watched the clip again, then turned slowly and sat down. We both sat there for a long time trying to make sense of it. I kept replaying it, over and over. I knew what I remembered, but now I was starting to question my own memory. Was it grief, even though I wasn't close to him? Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination? Why did she think she saw him too? That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made my skin crawl. I kept wondering how solid that memory really was. I could remember the way his feet dragged when he walked, the way his pajamas moved in the wind, his posture. It hadn't been a blur or a shadow. I remembered details. The next morning, I walked over to the fence line where I thought he had stood. The dirt wasn't disturbed. There were no prints. Nothing was out of place. Later that week, I dug out an old photo album I kept in a plastic bin in the basement. I had taken a photo one summer of Doug barbecuing with a goofy apron on years ago. I flipped through the pages until I found it. There he was, laughing, tongs in one hand, sunglasses on. He looked healthy, alive, round in the face, smiling. I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I remembered the way he had looked in the yard, frail, quiet, not smiling. I began to wonder if what I saw wasn't a hallucination or a ghost, but something else entirely. Something that just looked like him. Something that knew his clothes, his walk, his routine. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't remember him walking up. I didn't hear the gate open or close. I didn't hear footsteps, just the creak of the gate, and then he was there. That's when the idea started to form in my head. Not a ghost, not anything supernatural, but a person, someone watching, someone who wanted to be seen as Doug, who maybe knew Doug, who maybe had been watching our neighborhood for a while. I know how that sounds, but when you strip away the ghosts and spirits and all that, you're left with one scary truth. Sometimes the scariest thing is a person pretending to be someone else, someone who doesn't talk, someone who knows how to move when no one's looking, someone who stands just close enough for your brain to fill in the blanks. My wife still insists she saw him too. I don't argue anymore. I don't bring it up. But the following weekend, I bought 2 more outdoor cameras and set them up on either side of the backyard. One facing the fence, the other facing the woods behind our property. And I haven't gardened alone since. I never used to think much about echoes. You hear something, you find the source, and that's it. But what happened to me one summer in the woods made me realize how dangerous it can be to trust your ears, especially when you think you're hearing someone you know. It was July and I'd been needing a break. I work remotely, mostly sitting in front of a screen all day. The kind of work where your eyes go numb from reading emails and your brain never really feels present. So when my cousin Mike invited me to tag along on a week-long camping trip with a couple of his friends, I jumped at the chance. They were heading up to this old forestry area about 5 hours north of where I lived, a spot Mike had been to years ago. Off-grid, no cell service, middle of nowhere kind of place. Perfect, I thought. We drove up in 2 cars, Mike and I in one, his 2 friends, Chris and Andy, in the other. The last real town we passed through was a small dot-on-the-map kind of place. 2 gas pumps, a diner, and a bait shop with a weathered wooden sign. After that, it was another hour on gravel roads, winding deeper into the forest. The trees got taller, the canopy denser, and eventually the road turned into a dirt trail just wide enough for the tires. We parked when we couldn't go any further, loaded our gear, and hiked the rest of the way to a clearing Mike swore he remembered. Took about 40 minutes of walking through thick woods before we found the spot. It wasn't marked in any way, but there was an old fire pit made of blackened stones and a couple of rotting stumps that looked like they'd been used as seats in the past. The ground was mostly flat, soft with pine needles, and just past the trees to the east was a steep drop-off into a rocky ravine. The four of us set up our tents in a loose circle around the pit and spent the evening setting up camp, collecting firewood, and taking in the peace and quiet. The first few days were normal. We hiked, cooked over the fire, played cards under the lantern. Mike's friends were decent guys. Chris was the quieter one, always scribbling in a little notebook, while Andy had that constant energy, always moving, joking, poking at things in the woods. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood as Mike, but I hadn't really known them before this trip. The third night was when things started to feel off. That evening, a fog rolled in. Not thick, but enough to hang low between the trees and blur the distance. We all noticed how quiet it got. No wind, no bugs, just the sound of our fire crackling. Andy kept joking about how it felt like something out of a horror movie, but no one really laughed. I turned in around midnight, exhausted from a long hike we'd done earlier. The others stayed up a bit longer, drinking and talking. I was out within minutes, wrapped in my sleeping bag, tent zipped up, flashlight near my feet just in case. But somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It was faint at first, a soft voice. Mike! I blinked hard, still half asleep, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Mike, come here. It was coming from outside the tent. It was quiet, but not whispering. A calm, steady voice. Female. I figured it had to be one of the guys messing around. Maybe they were still up, trying to spook me. But the voice didn't sound like any of them. And more than that, it sounded wrong. Too clear, too flat, like someone reading a line out loud. I laid there, heart starting to thump, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then I heard footsteps, soft ones, not stomping or careless, careful, deliberate, like someone was trying not to be heard but couldn't help stepping on twigs. They circled my tent once, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just stayed frozen, listening. A full minute went by. Then the voice again, even softer this time. Mike, come here. Then silence. I don't know how long I stayed awake after that. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. The next thing I remember was hearing birds chirping and the light of morning creeping through the mesh above me. When I stepped out of the tent, the others were just starting to stir. I didn't say anything at first. Maybe it had been a dream or some weird animal mimic. But as we all sat around the fire drinking coffee, I casually mentioned hearing someone call out in the night. Andy shrugged. Didn't hear anything. Chris just stared at the fire. Then, quietly, he said, I thought I heard someone walking around. We all looked at him. Didn't think much of it, he added. Figured one of you got up to take a piss. We left it at that, but I noticed both Andy and Chris checked the tree line more often that day. That night, I stayed up later. I had my flashlight next to me, my boots still on inside the tent, just in case. I must have nodded off around 1 a.m., because the next time I opened my eyes, it was still dark, but something had changed. I couldn't place it right away, just a feeling. Then I noticed the air cold and still. No wind, no crickets, just like before. Then came the voice again. Only this time it said, Chris, it's me. Soft, calm, female. I sat bolt upright. My blood turned to ice. The voice came again. Chris, come out. I leaned toward the tent door, listening. Then I heard a sound that nearly made me scream. Chris's tent unzipping. Slow, quiet, but unmistakable. I forced myself to unzip mine just a little and peek through. In the dim moonlight, I could just barely see Chris stepping out of his tent. He stood there, frozen, scanning the woods. Then the voice came again, farther off this time. Over here. Chris turned and took a step toward the trees. That's when I snapped out of it. I unzipped my tent all the way, called out in a sharp whisper. He turned, startled, and I waved him back over. I didn't care how crazy I looked. I just shook my head hard and pointed back at his tent. He hesitated, then stepped back and zipped himself inside again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I pulled him aside and told him what I'd heard the night before too. He went pale. He said he thought the voice was someone he knew, his sister. He couldn't explain why, it just sounded like her. Even though she was hours away, it somehow felt normal in the moment. We told Mike and Andy. They both looked shaken. Mike suggested packing up and heading out early, but Andy pushed back, said we were overreacting, that maybe there were hikers nearby messing with us. But there weren't. We hadn't seen a soul since we'd arrived. That night was the worst of all. We kept the fire going late, all four of us sitting in a tight circle, flashlights nearby, bear spray within reach. We didn't talk much. Every rustle in the trees made us tense. Eventually, around 2 a.m., we all went to our tents, agreeing to keep them half-zipped so we could listen. I laid there for what felt like hours. Then, at some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up to the sound of movement, fast, frantic movement. A zipper, thudding footsteps, then a scream. It came from Andy's tent. I grabbed my flashlight and burst out, yelling. Chris and Mike did the same, but Andy was gone. His tent was empty, the zipper torn halfway down. We followed the flattened grass and broken branches into the woods, calling his name, but there was nothing. No answer, no more noise, just silence. We searched until dawn, found nothing. Eventually, we packed up and hiked back to the cars. Drove straight to the sheriff's office in the nearest town and reported everything. They launched a search. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers. But Andy was never found. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no clothing, just his backpack still in the tent and his boots missing. We were questioned separately. They asked if Andy had enemies, if he'd been using drugs, if he'd had a reason to run away. But we all knew it wasn't any of that. It was something else. Something or someone had been out there, watching, waiting, using our own voices. A few months later, long after the search had been called off, I was at home, sitting on my couch one night, trying not to think about it. I flipped on the TV, but muted it. I got up to grab a drink from the kitchen. That's when I heard it, from the hallway near the stairs. Soft, calm. It's me. Come here. My spine stiffened. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding my breath. Then from behind me in the kitchen, I heard it again. Same voice. It's me. Come here. I turned around, flashlight in hand, and searched every inch of the house, every room, every corner, but there was nothing there. I wish I could say that was the last time, that I moved on, but I didn't, because every few months I still hear it. At night, always from two places at once, always someone I know, and I never go toward it. Not anymore. I've gone back and forth in my head 1,000 times about that trip. What happened, what didn't happen, and what could have happened. And no matter how I spin it, no matter how many times I try to talk myself out of it, I keep landing in the same place. We got lucky. Really lucky. It was early August, a few years ago now. A group of us 6 friends who had known each other since high school planned a long weekend camping trip in northern Ontario. The spot was familiar, deep in the woods near a lake we'd visited the year before. It was far enough off the grid that there was no cell signal, no rangers, and no real infrastructure. Just wilderness. The plan was simple. 3 cars, 6 people, 2 nights. No itinerary. Just campfires, beer, a few joints, and a couple of guys brought mushrooms. I wasn't one of them. I liked to stay aware, even when I was drinking, but I didn't mind others doing their thing. We arrived Friday afternoon. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, warm but not humid. We parked on a dirt road about 2 kilometers from the site, loaded up our gear, and hiked in. The camp itself was a wide clearing surrounded by dense trees, with a path leading down to the water. We arranged our tents in a circle around the fire pit, the way we always did. A little semicircle of nylon and smoke and stories. The first night was easy. Drinks, music from someone's portable speaker, laughter, snacks. It got a bit rowdy, but nothing unusual. Around 1 a.m., most of us started turning in. I stayed up a little longer, sitting by the fire with a beer, just enjoying the silence that comes after the noise fades. That's when he walked in. I didn't see where he came from. He just appeared at the edge of the trees. A guy, probably mid-30s, maybe older, wearing a dark hoodie and cargo pants. He looked like someone who'd been hiking alone for a while. Dirty boots, scratched arms, but he was clean-shaven, which struck me as strange. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded at me, gave a sort of half-wave, and stepped into the circle like he belonged there. I remember feeling frozen for a moment. I thought maybe he was from a nearby camp, lost maybe, or maybe one of my friends had invited him and forgotten to mention it. I didn't say anything, just nodded back. The fire cracked between us. The guy knelt near the edge of the fire pit, warming his hands. He didn't ask to join. He just did. He wasn't drunk, didn't smell like booze. He didn't look high either. He seemed calm, too calm. His eyes were dark and steady, never darting around the way people's do when they're uncomfortable. After a minute or two, he stood up, stretched, and said something like, "You guys picked a good spot." Then he walked over to an empty camping chair, sat down, and just stayed there. I didn't know what to do. I looked at the tents around the fire and tried to decide whether to wake someone up or not. But the guy wasn't doing anything outwardly threatening, just sitting. Eventually, I mumbled something like, "I'm heading to bed," and zipped myself into my tent. I lay there wide awake, listening. I heard the fire crackle. I didn't hear him leave. I didn't hear anything. Sometime later, maybe an hour or so, I finally drifted off. When I woke up, it was bright out. The fire was out. Everyone was slowly climbing out of their tents, groggy and stretching. I stepped outside and scanned the area. The guy was gone. I asked around, trying not to sound paranoid. None of my friends remembered him. A couple of them thought I was joking. One of them said I must have been more drunk than I realized. But I hadn't imagined it. There were 7 chairs around the fire the night before. I counted them again in the morning. One had been moved slightly, turned toward the fire rather than toward the rest of the circle. That was strange, but not enough to raise alarms. People move chairs, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. That second day was mellow. Swimming in the lake, hiking a bit, cooking hot dogs over the fire. Some of the group dropped shrooms around sunset and spent hours staring at the stars and whispering about colors. I stayed sober. I couldn't stop thinking about that guy. That night, we all sat around the fire again. But this time, I made a point to stay alert. Around midnight, people started wandering off to bed. I stayed behind again, under the excuse of cleaning up the food and fire. The woods were quiet. No wind, no animals. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear footsteps. But in the morning, something was off again. Took a while before we noticed. One of my buddies, Matt, was going to heat up leftover sausages from the cooler. But when he opened it, everything had been reorganized, like perfectly stacked, vacuum level clean. The ice had been drained and replaced with lake water. All the food was neatly repacked, resealed, not missing, just touched. We thought someone was playing a prank, but it was too meticulous. The kind of order you'd see in the military. I don't know how to describe it. It didn't look like a drunk joke. It looked intentional, careful, clean. Even the trash bag had been emptied. Items still inside, but compressed down like someone had folded everything before putting it in. Now everyone started getting uneasy. We double-checked all our gear. No one was missing anything, but 2 of us found our sleeping bags had been rolled a bit tighter. One guy said his boots had been moved slightly, still right next to his tent, but rotated 180 degrees. That was the breaking point for me. I pulled everyone together and told them about the guy from the first night. Described him in detail, how he showed up, sat down, didn't talk much, then vanished by morning. Now, with all this other weird stuff, they finally started believing me. We debated packing up early. We were supposed to stay one more night, but there was this growing tension between us. No one was outright panicking, but you could feel it. Nobody wanted to admit they were scared, but nobody wanted to be the one to suggest staying either. We voted quietly. All 6 of us wanted out. It took a couple hours to break camp. But even then, as we were rolling up tents and stowing away gear, we kept noticing small things. Someone's knife had been cleaned and oiled. One of the first aid kits had been reorganized. A pile of firewood had been res-tacked perfectly. Nothing stolen, nothing destroyed, just straightened. We started hiking out late morning. No one talked much. We all kept glancing back. It wasn't until we were almost back to the cars that we noticed the last detail. On the trunk of one of the cars, drawn in the dust of the rear windshield, was a perfect military-style smiley face. Just 2 dots and a curved line. But under it, in small print, someone had written, "You forgot to clean the spark plug." None of us knew what it meant, but we didn't touch it. We left it there, got in our cars, and drove. Once I was back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started doing some reading. Not ghost stories, real stuff. Missing persons cases. Reports of strange encounters in backcountry areas. And the more I looked, the more I found patterns. Isolated groups, strange visitors, odd behavior, disappearances. I came across a theory on one of those forums. Someone had posted a comment. What if someone planned to kill a camper, but didn't go through with it? What if they chickened out, or got high and forgot? What if all they did was clean up as a habit from their old army training, covering tracks just in case, but they didn't commit the murder? That idea stuck with me, chilled me more than any story ever had, because it made too much sense. What if that guy had come to our camp that night intending to kill one of us? Maybe all of us? What if he scoped us out, took stock of our habits, our weaknesses? Maybe he waited for the right moment, and it never came. Maybe he got too high himself. Maybe the mushrooms were his, planted earlier in the clearing, and he picked the wrong ones. And what if, after failing to go through with it, his muscle memory kicked in? That army habit to cover your presence. Clean everything. Leave no trace. Eliminate evidence. Reset the scene. We weren't meant to leave. We were just meant to be blamed. What if he hoped the cops would find one of us dead, and the rest of us would turn on each other? No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just a bunch of drunk and high kids in the woods, and one of them turns up murdered. No mention of a stranger, no footprints, no evidence, but he forgot to do the killing. And that's the only reason I'm here telling this story. I haven't been camping since. I don't think I ever will again, because that guy is still out there, and next time he might not forget. Every summer, a group of us would go camping up near Kearney, Ontario. We'd been doing it since we were in our early 20s. It started as something simple, just a few of us looking to get out of the city, but over time it turned into a tradition. Same location, same time of year, same general setup. By then, we'd gotten into a rhythm. We always pitched our tents in a wide circle with a fire pit right in the middle. That way, no matter where your tent was, you could crawl out and be right at the heart of things. That particular trip, there were maybe 10 of us. Some old friends, a few new additions, the usual mix. We brought more than enough food and drinks. A few people brought mushrooms, and a couple joints got passed around. It wasn't anything crazy. We weren't trying to melt our minds or anything. It was just about letting go for a few days. The forest around Kearney is dense, quiet, and beautiful, especially in the summer. Tall trees, soft ground. A lake nearby for washing up and cooling off. The first night was perfect. We got the fire going right after setting up camp. Everyone had something to contribute. Snacks, beers, folding chairs, music playing quietly from a Bluetooth speaker. The air was cool and smelled like pine and smoke. The kind of night where everything feels simple and safe. It was probably around 11 p.m. when he showed up. Just walked out of the dark and into the circle like he'd been there the whole time. He was calm, casual. Said something about how he was camping alone nearby and saw our fire. That he didn't bring firewood and wanted to know if he could join us for a while. He said he was ex-military and was using some of his vacation time to get off the grid and unwind. He didn't seem threatening. He wasn't loud or sketchy or stumbling drunk. If anything, he was too normal. Clean clothes, good posture, polite. Someone gave him a beer, and he tossed in a few bucks for firewood without even being asked. That kind of easy friendliness is common up north. People who camp often look out for each other. We let him sit with us. He joined in the conversation like he belonged there. Didn't dominate it, didn't make it weird. Just kind of blended in. I remember thinking he had the kind of voice that was forgettable, not deep or high, just flat. Like he was used to keeping it even all the time. As the night went on, people peeled off to bed one by one. Some of us were high, others just drunk and tired. I was either the second or third to turn in. I remember crawling into my tent with that heavy, warm feeling in my body. The mix of weed, beer, and exhaustion. The fire was still going when I zipped the flap shut. I woke up sometime later, though I didn't check the time right away. The firelight was flickering against the walls of my tent, and I could hear someone talking. Not loud, just a steady, low murmur. I figured someone else had woken up and was still enjoying the fire. When I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out, I saw it was the random guy. He was sitting on a log near the fire, staring into it, talking to himself. His hands were in his lap, and he wasn't moving much, just rocking slightly like people do when they're trying to think. I couldn't make out the words. It didn't sound like a conversation, just a long, quiet ramble. Still half tripping on shrooms, I remember just thinking I wasn't in any condition to process it. My brain felt foggy, and the firelight seemed too bright, too strange. I closed the flap, lay back down, and told myself it didn't matter. Maybe he was just weird. Maybe the shrooms were messing with me. I shut my eyes and drifted back into a restless sleep. In the morning, I climbed out of my tent, groggy and sore, and saw the fire was still smoldering. Smoke rising in slow spirals into the early sunlight. People were already up and moving around, making breakfast, stretching, shaking off hangovers. I looked around and didn't see the random guy anywhere. At first, we just assumed he'd left early. But then someone asked if anyone had seen him pack up or say goodbye. Nobody had. So we looked over at the site where he said he was camping. It wasn't far, maybe a 5-minute walk through a short trail. When we got there, we were surprised at how clean it was. Spotless, actually. No fire pit, no tent, no gear. No tracks. Not even a plastic wrapper or scuffed patch of dirt. It was like no one had been there at all. Back at camp, we all started comparing notes. Everyone remembered him. Everyone saw him. He'd sat with us, drank with us, talked with us. But none of us saw where he came from or where he went. And when we thought about it, the timeline didn't make sense. The last 2 people to go to bed said they passed out around 3:30 a.m. One guy said he got up around 6 o'clock to pee and saw the fire dying down. But the guy was already gone. That meant he would have left in that narrow 2-hour window, without making a sound, without leaving a trace. And he hadn't carried much on him to begin with. No backpack, no lantern, no food. We tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was camping further away than he said. Maybe he packed light, slept rough. Maybe he was just a minimalist camper. It was possible, but something about it felt wrong. The rest of the trip was uneventful. We hiked, we swam, we laughed about how weird that night had been. But I never really stopped thinking about him. Something about the way he looked, the way he moved, the flatness in his eyes when he stared into the fire. Fast forward 4 or 5 years. I was living in a different city, working a new job, trying to get my life together. It was just a regular day. I'd come home from work, made dinner, flipped on the TV. The news was on one of those national segments that covers major arrests. That's when I saw the picture. It was him. I'm almost certain of it. His hair was a little different, maybe darker. His face was older, more hollow. But the structure was the same. Eyes, jaw, mouth. Even the same way he held himself in the mugshot. Stiff, reserved, like he was still trying to stay under the radar. He'd been arrested for multiple crimes. Kidnapping, rape, murder. It was all there in the headline. His name was different than the one he gave us that night. I couldn't remember exactly what he told us, but I know it wasn't the one on the screen. I just sat there, frozen, not moving. The kind of stillness your body goes into when something clicks in a way you weren't ready for. My stomach dropped. I felt heat rise up through my chest and into my face. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I finally exhaled and felt dizzy. The memory hit like a sledgehammer. Him sitting by our fire, talking to himself at 4 a.m., disappearing without a sound. That clean campsite. Couldn't prove it. We never took a photo. None of us knew his full name. He was just the random guy who joined our fire. But I swear it was him. Something about that night must have stamped his face into my brain. Like my mind knew even back then that something wasn't right. I reached out to one of my friends from that trip. Asked him if he'd seen the news. He hadn't. I sent him the article. He called me 2 minutes later and said, "That's the guy." No hesitation, just certainty. We talked about it for a long time, went over all the details again. Nothing new came up, but the more we talked, the more convinced we became. It's hard to explain the feeling that gives you. Knowing you sat beside someone capable of that kind of violence. That they might have been waiting for something, testing the waters, watching how people moved when they went to bed, how much they drank. We were lucky. Maybe there were too many of us. Maybe we didn't fit whatever pattern he was looking for. Or maybe he just wasn't ready. I don't know. What I do know is that I look at camping differently now. I still go sometimes, but I keep my circle small. Carry a knife. I don't take drugs in the woods anymore. And I don't trust strangers who just walk into camp. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts, no monsters. Just a man with a calm voice and a flat stare who sat by our fire for one night and disappeared without a trace. It was real. And the scariest part? We welcomed him. I think I've heard this before somewhere, but I can't remember where. Maybe it was something someone told me when I was younger, or maybe I just imagined it after hearing half of it somewhere else. I don't know. All I know is that when it happened to me, it didn't feel like a story. It felt real. Too real. The kind of thing that settles into your chest and stays there, making you second-guess everything. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 27 and I'd started doing solo camping trips about a year before that. It started small, local parks, one-night stays. Then I got more confident and the trips got longer, further from home. It wasn't some big survivalist thing. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just liked the quiet, the simplicity of it. The way time stretched out when you were alone in the woods with no phone, no noise, no plans. This trip was supposed to be a 3-night loop in a national forest out west. I'd researched it for weeks, read trail reports, marked water sources, downloaded maps. I wasn't totally new to the area. I'd been in the forest before, but not on this route. It was a longer loop, less trafficked, mostly used by hunters and long-distance hikers. Perfect for what I wanted: quiet, nature, a good reset. I left early on a Thursday morning, parked my car at a ranger station that allowed overnight parking, signed into the trail registry, and started in. I had about 40 pounds on my back, tent, sleeping bag, food, stove, extra water, first aid kit, everything packed tight. It was cool when I started. Sunny with a breeze. The trail wound up into the hills fast, crossing small creeks, moving between patches of dense pines and more open areas with low brush and sandstone outcrops. I passed a few hikers in the first couple hours, but by noon I was alone. That first day went smoothly. I covered a good 12 miles, found a decent flat patch near a small stream, set up camp, cooked a basic meal, and sat watching the shadows get longer. When the sun dropped, the cold came fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped everything up tight, and slept straight through the night. The second day started normal, too. I broke camp early, ate a quick breakfast, and got moving before the sun was fully up. I had another 12 or so miles to cover that day. The trail was less clear in places, and I had to bushwhack a couple of times when downed trees blocked the path, but nothing serious. The terrain got rougher as the day went on. More climbs, more loose rocks, but nothing I couldn't handle. I reached my second campsite late in the afternoon, tired but still feeling good. That's when things started to feel different. Not wrong exactly, just off. It was the silence, I think. The first night, I'd heard the usual sounds: crickets, owls, wind in the trees. But that second night, it felt too quiet, like everything had packed up and left. I told myself it was just the elevation. Thinner air, fewer bugs, cooler temps. Logical reasons. But the unease stuck with me. I didn't sleep as well that night. I kept waking up, sure I'd heard something outside. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, a faint shuffling sound. I unzipped the tent once around 2 in the morning and looked out with my headlamp, but I didn't see anything. No tracks, no eye shine, no movement. I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I packed up and started the final leg of the loop. I was tired, moving slower than the days before, but still on track to finish the loop and get back to my car by the following afternoon. The trail climbed higher that day, winding along a ridgeline that gave me views of the valley below. It was beautiful, quiet, empty. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped for water and to rest my legs. That's when I noticed something that didn't sit right. A boot print. It wasn't mine. The tread was different. Deepa Vida. Not fresh, but recent. I crouched and studied it for a while. It was hard to tell which direction it had come from, but it hadn't been there the last time I passed through that stretch. I was sure of that. That's when I remembered. I hadn't passed anyone that day. No other hikers, no sign of people since I'd left camp that morning. I stood there for a long time, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the branches and the soft hum of distant insects. I moved on a little faster now. That night, I found a clearing not far off the main trail. It was flatter than expected, dry, and sheltered by a ring of thick trees. Felt safe enough, at least for the night. I set up my tent quickly, boiled some water, ate a simple dinner, and tried to shake the feeling that had started to settle in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound started up again, soft at first, like someone shifting their weight in the dark. I told myself it was just wildlife, a raccoon, a deer, but it didn't feel right. The sounds would stop whenever I held my breath and listened. Then they'd start again, just out of sync with the normal rhythm of the woods. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood go cold. A zipper, not mine. I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then silence. I stayed like that until dawn. When the sun came up, I unzipped my tent slowly and stepped out. Everything looked normal. Nothing moved. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, checked the trees, checked the brush. Nothing. No tracks. No signs of other people. But when I got back to my tent, I saw it. A footprint. Clear as day, right next to mine. Same tread I'd seen the day before, facing my tent. That was it for me. I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just got my gear together and started hiking hard back toward the start of the loop. I had close to 20 miles to go, but I didn't care. I needed to be out of those woods. I didn't stop except to fill my water bottle once from a stream. Every time I slowed down, I felt like I was being watched, like something was pacing me just out of sight. The wind picked up in the afternoon, and I kept hearing branches snapping behind me. Not close, but not far either. I made it back to the car just before dark. The ranger station was locked. There was no one around. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, breathing hard, hands shaking. Eventually, I drove out and didn't stop until I was back in cell range. I pulled into a gas station, washed my face in the bathroom sink, and bought a bottle of water and some food. I didn't even feel hungry. I just needed something normal. When I got home, I unpacked slowly, checking all my gear. Everything was there. Nothing missing, nothing damaged. But I kept thinking about that print, that zipper sound, the way the forest had gone quiet. I told myself maybe it was another camper. Maybe I just missed them on the trail. Maybe they had nothing to do with me. But it didn't feel that way. A few days later, I went back to the trip logs on the forest website. I cross-referenced the dates. Nobody else had signed in for that trail loop the day I went in. Nobody else had signed out around the time I did. I tried reaching out to the ranger's office by email. No reply. Weeks passed. I went back to work, tried to put it out of my head, but I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about that night, the sound of a zipper, the print outside my tent, and how I'd been so sure I was alone. It never made the news. Nothing ever came of it. But every now and then, I'll catch a story about a missing hiker or someone vanishing off a trail, and I get that same tight feeling in my chest. Like I dodged something I didn't understand. Like maybe someone was out there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who watched from the shadows and waited for the right kind of quiet. I've gone on hikes since then, but never solo. Not anymore. And I don't camp deep in the woods like I used to. Not because I'm scared of bears or storms or getting lost. Because I think I've heard this story before. Somewhere. I just didn't realize I was in it until it was already over.